So begin with the lightest colours, first using yellow and then orange. So we'll start off with this section here, which is quite yellowy and orangey. So we're going to use a small paintbrush. I think this yellow matches quite well. I'm just going to work my paintbrush round, work the water and the powder into one another to create my desired paint consistency. So I usually say about 10 seconds. And then using the tip of the paintbrush, and I'm looking at the picture, so just using the tip of the paintbrush, I'm going to follow the outline of the shape. So I'm just working my way down. So small brush strokes. Now it does go quite greeny over this side, but over this side it stays quite yellowy, orangey. Now in the middle it does fade away, so all I'm going to do is just wet my paintbrush, just dab off the excess water, and then I'm going to work a little bit into the yellow and pull some of the colour across. Wash my paintbrush again, just from the edge of the yellow, and pull a little bit of the colour out, and as you can see it gets weaker and weaker. So you're producing what is called a gradient, from darker colour to lighter colour. And I'm bringing that down, nice small brush strokes, and following the direction of the outline of the shape. When we get to the bottom, the colour gets a little bit more pigmented, so I'm going to pick up some of that paint and pull it up. So wash my paintbrush now. If you want it to blend, wash the paintbrush, pull from the edge of the colour, pull that up, and there we go. I've got some nice blended yellow tones. So now some areas do have a little bit of orange in, so I'm going to select my orange colour, just a little bit, because the darker the colours go, the more difficult they are to paint with and blend with. So we just need a little bit of the colour. We don't want it too strong because we want it to blend with the yellow. So I'm just washing my paintbrush, dabbing off that excess water, and then I'm just going to work into it just from the edge of the colour and pull it down. So I've got some orangey tones. I don't want a stop-start line, so I'm just going to pull that out. I'm just going to wash my brush again and then pull out from the edge, and that's how you blend. There we go. So now if I want to put in a few little green tones just while it's still wet, because it won't blend unless it's wet, I'm just picking up the tiniest little bit on my paintbrush, very, very weak, so I've not worked the paintbrush into it too much. And I'm just putting in just a few little green tones. It's very weak. There we go. And then I'm just going to let that dry. So the next bit I'm going to work into now is going to be, we've got some yellowy tones underneath the green there and under there, so I'm going to set them up, let them dry, and then I can put the green on top. So I'm going for quite a cold yellow now, not a warm yellow, a cold yellow. I'm just going to go to this section over here. It looks to me like the yellow is sat underneath the bluey green tones. So small brush strokes. And I'm just going to let that dry before I work into it. I'm going to have a little look about. Do I need to put yellow anywhere else? There we go. Wash my paintbrush. I think there's a little bit of yellow under here, so I'm going to pick some up. And then I'll let it fade away, because it looks like it fades away on the picture here. So I'm just putting that yellow in. I'm not going to go too close to the last bit that I painted, as I don't want the colours to run into each other. So bringing that up, once I want to start fading it, I'm just going to wash my brush, dab off the excess water, and just pull from the end of the colour to allow it to fade away. That water will make the colour weaker. And there we go. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is this nice orangey tone. And it is quite strong in colour, so work that paintbrush around for about 10 seconds. And then using the tip of the paintbrush, very, very small strokes, especially when you're using them dark colours. And then it does start to fade a little bit, so I'm washing my paintbrush, dab off the excess water and pull it out. Wash the paintbrush and then pull the colour out. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to do the same down here, except I'm going to really, really fade that colour more. So I've washed my paintbrush. I'm going to wash it again. The reason that we start with the lightest colours first is so that if we do make a mistake and we paint in the wrong section, it's absolutely fine. You can paint straight over the top of it once it's dry with a darker colour. Do not worry about outlining, that would come very, very last after you've completed the whole painting. Outlining comes last. So I'm going to let that dry. If you decide I need to put some darker tone down, you're going to have to wait until it's dry to do that. Otherwise, what you will get is that your colours run. Right, the next bit. So I'm looking for, there's a little bit of yellow over here. I'm still working with those light tones. So I'm going to layer a little bit of yellow over here. And then I know that I'm going to put green on top of that. Don't forget about your direction. You're following the outline of the shape. There we go. Right, so now I'm ready to move on to a darker colour. Now I'm going to move on to the red on the love heart. So washing my brush, I'm going to select the red colour, work the paintbrush around a little bit so I've got a bit of strong colour just for the edging, and then I'm going to start with this tricky bit over here. So using the very tip of your paintbrush very slowly. Just like that, and then it's going to start to fade. I'm just going to do my outline first. Don't be scared to turn the paper if you need to get your hand a little bit more comfortable. I'm just going to pick up a little bit more paint and pull a little bit more out. Just look at the areas where it's at its darkest. And what I can even see in the painting is that there's sort of some tones of, it's sort of like a reddy orangey tone. So I'm just going to put some little bits of orange into that before I start to fade the colour. So wash my brush, pick up some orange, brush stroke left, brush stroke left. I'm even going to put into it, wash my brush, just a little bit of a warm yellow, just to really layer the colours. There we go, and now I'm going to start to fade it. So wash my brush, and just from the edge of where I've last painted, I'm pulling it out a tiny little bit. Then I'm going to wash my brush from the edge of the last bit, just pull it out a little bit. There we go, wash my brush, pull it out a little bit. Now our painting's not going to look exactly like the artist's work because the artist has used colour pencils. So ours might look a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. It's going to look a little bit different. There we go. So wash my brush, just pull it out from the edge of the last bit that we painted. And you want it nice and light in the middle. If you have any stop-start lines, all you need to do is just pick up a little bit of colour and just dab it in that area, just to soften up that stop-start line. And if you've got any harsh sort of paint stroke lines, you could just dab your paintbrush on top with a little bit of water just to soften that up so that it looks a little bit neater. Don't forget, every time you wet the paintbrush, you are going to dab off the excess water because we don't want our painting to be swimming in water because it gets difficult to control. And there we go, I'm quite happy with that. If you do need to take any extra colour back, you can use a little bit of tissue to do that. There we go, so I'm going to allow that area to dry now. I do think I need a little bit more colour in here, so I'm going to go back to that orange. When you're working around your paint, and you do need to be careful that you don't put your hand in the last bit that you've painted. You might want to turn your paper. It's got some little tones of orange and yellow in there, so I'm going to put them in as well. There we go. I'm more happy with that. I'm going to put some little bits of orange in this bit up the top, yellowy orange. I'm happy with that. Now we can start working on another colour. So now I'm going to start working into the green areas. So even though I can see blue there on the picture, I know that the green is laid underneath it because it's greeny blue. So I'm going to put the green down, and then what I will do is let it dry and work on top of it with the blue. And just remember, if you do want to fade something, you just pull from the edge of the colour with water. And then I'll let that dry. So I'm going to use a watery paint, and I'm just going to put a little bit more green into this area. There we go. I'm going to put a little bit of green in on top of this yellow now. Just one shade of green at a time. When that's dry, I'm going to put darker green at the edges. There we go. So I'm going to work a little bit of green into this top area. I might have to turn my paper for this. And now I'm going to start working into my blue areas. If your paint at any point feels a little bit scrapey, just add a little bit more water to it so it's more fluid. but careful you don't add too much water and lose that control of it. So whenever you're doing any outlining, you are using the very, very tip of the brush. Careful that you're not holding the paintbrush to the side, you're holding it from the top so that the tip points down. Now I think I can see a little bit of a purpley tone in there, or even a little bit of black. I'm going to choose purple so that my painting is still nice and bright. And I'm just going to put some purpley tones into my blue. Now because that blue is so highly pigmented and dark, I am going to wet my brush, dab off the excess, and now I'm going to start to pull it out just from the edge. So keep adding water to your paintbrush. Careful with how hard you press on the paper, you want to be nice and gentle. Now I would say working with your darker colours is the hardest bit. So this takes the longest, because you've got to work a little bit slower, a little bit more carefully. Now if we want to make a dark shade of blue, we can use what's in the palette. Let me just test on the table. That's green, and I want to use a dark green actually down the bottom here, so I'm going to put that in first, but just be very, very careful with your dark colours. I'm just going to run a little bit of yellow through that just to lighten up the middle. There we go, and I'm quite happy with that bit now. Remember, we can't get it precisely like the picture because the picture is produced with colour pencils, so we're given our painted interpretation of that image. So there we go. So I'm just going to allow that area to dry before I go back into it, and I'm just going to add blue to this area over here. And I'm going to use a few different tones. I'm going to put a little bit of purple in it again. And then when we want it to fade away, we are just going to use a little bit of water. There we go. So I'm going to have a little look around my painting. This bit needs blue on it as well. I'm just going to turn my painting to the side just to get my hand comfortable. I don't want to put my hand in the wet paint. I'm going to let that dry. And I'll start adding paint now to this area here. Now just a quick little scan around. Where do I need to do now? Maybe just a little bit more orange into this area here. So now I'll have to do a little bit of mixing because I want a really dark blue. So a little bit of black with blue, and I'm going to put in a bit of a light blue, and then I'm going to put more black into it. I'm trying to achieve this colour up here and here. And then what I'm going to do is let it completely dry, and I'm going to use a black coloured pencil just to get in any of those really, really precise outlines. So now that my work is dry, I'm just going to use a little bit of black coloured pencil. And when I'm doing this, I'm going to use different pressures to get different tones. So in some areas my lines are going to be nice and dark, and in other areas they're going to be very light. I'm going to start to make it lighter and fade away here, and then as I come across, darker. It's nice and dark down here. And there we go, one finished artist copy. If you do feel that you need to just darken up a few little areas, you can do so with coloured pencils, just very gently. And little hints of other colours in, little different tones. If you ever need to neaten up any of your painting, you can do it like that as well. Or if you need to add in any lighter colours. So if I want to lighten up this green area here, it's really easy to do so with your colour pencils. If I want to blend it a little bit more, really easy to do so with the coloured pencils. So painting, it's really good for a base, the foundation of a piece of work, and it's great to do mixed media work where you work into it. There we go.